Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
A bit about you.
And I've been told to say a bit about me. I'm actually not a mining engineer, for those who know. And actually, I used to make it a point to make that distinction very, very clearly, at all times. But I'm actually an electrical engineer. I've had short stints in the power sector of the country, but the bulk of my experience has been in the mining sector. I think Peter has dropped some really incisive ideas into our minds this afternoon, and I'm sure we'll all go and give it some long, hard thought, because after 100 years of mining, it is quite sad that no Ghanaian can point to himself and say, well, I own a mine in this country. So I think ideas like these would actually make that a possibility. Gold in the ground really means nothing till we can find the funding to exploit it. And that is what I'll be addressing very briefly. So I'll be talking to you very briefly about some of the challenges that have to do with investing in the mining sector of this country. And, we'll look into a few ideas that we can consider. So we'll look at the mining investment decision. And we also need to understand that no country is an island. So Ghana cannot on its own just be in the investment space. We are competing with other countries. But we find ourselves in a region, and there's the concept of the neighborhood effect. If you build $1 million house where I live at Hacho, and you build $1 million house where Peter lives in the plush part of Accra, I'm sure Peter's house, when it's valued, might actually be worth 1.5 million, even though both houses cost $1 million. And if I'm not lucky, my house might be worth $500,000 because of the location. So we need to talk about, our African address, as it used to be called in the old days. And then why Ghana? Why should, an investment fund or a pension fund? And I think, Peter, as you spoke, I sat there and I was thinking that we have pension funds in Ghana. Nothing stops a pension fund from investing in the mining investment. I mean, we really need to think through this some more and see what's possible. But why should somebody sitting in Toronto, Canada, or London or Johannesburg raise capital from, people's pension contributions and come and invest in Ghana? Why Ghana? So we'll have a quick chat about that. And basically quickly look at what we already know, the value proposition of our industry. And I was actually talking about challenges, but I'll call it emerging conversations that we need to have. And then a few questions anybody about to make an investment decision asks. We'll look at those, and then I'll propose a few ideas, and I'm sure my seniors would have a lot more that they can add as we go ahead. All right. So how is the mining investment decision made? What are the drivers of our industry? I think one of our previous speakers actually indicated the fact that we had seen an upsurge in demand, but then it seemed to be plateauing. But I would actually add that, that demand will remain because it's actually becoming more difficult to replace the ounces that we are mining for a number of reasons. So as to whether we are in a peak gold or peak mineral situation, I cannot tell yet. But the demand is going to be there. I mean, now we have battery minerals coming into the system. The demand for gold is going to be there, the demand for bauxite and all that, because these are things that are integral to our way of life. I keep telling people, if you woke up this morning, ate with a spoon, ate in a ceramic bowl, switched on your light, drove a car, you've benefited from mining every step of the way. Because every single thing you touched came out of mining. It's as simple as that. So the demand is going to remain, we believe, and that is a driver for our industry. And then the prices as well. The expectation is that hopefully, maybe some of these prices will resurge once again. But once people can take a view on this, it helps drive our industry. And then finally, the broader investment interest in the sector. You know, we're speaking about pension funds from other countries. They'd like to invest long term. They want, you know, some gentle, regular, you know, margin or return coming back to them. And mining tends to position itself quite nicely into some of these spaces. And then if you look at moving away from the broader industry, the actual mining decision, you know, if we want to come and invest here, we definitely will look at the geological resources. So the country has to have the resource. And the legal and regulatory framework becomes important. The mining policy, which drives the sector itself, usually, you know, looked after by the commission, becomes extremely important. But then the business friendliness in the country and the stakeholder posture is something that is extremely important. I mean, I'm sure Newmont has had some problems in Peru. I can't remember the name of the project now, but after spending about 400 million, the community is reacting. Anglo really had to slow down Colombia the other day because the community members, the posture was that, led by a Catholic priest, we won't do this. We won't allow mining to take place here. Some of it had to do with the natural water supply systems and all of that. You know, so the stakeholder posture is extremely important as a decision is being made. Cost of doing business in the country is something that we look at as well as we make the, you know, investment decision. And finally, what's the return that the investor is going to get? That becomes really important. So if you look at all of this as a bundle, it is down to what are the risks I'm going to encounter and what are the rewards. And if the rewards outweigh the risk and you are comfortable with it, then the investment gets made. And this, you know, goes into a bit more detail about the same issues. So your investment, when you're investing, you have objectives. I want a certain margin. I want a certain return, etc. These are the risks, and your own risk appetite becomes important. But I'm not going to go too much into that chart there, which basically talks about issues you can control as a mining company or as an investor. But there are also issues you cannot control, and they are unpredictable. Something like the gold price, you know, and all of that. But like I said, I won't really go into that. But the point I just want to make fundamentally is that, you know, investment decisions are influenced greatly by the perspective or perception of risk and uncertainty. The more risky, you know, a particular project is, or the more uncertain a particular investment destination is, the less likely it is that the investment will be made. You know, that is why things like government policy, etc., become extremely important as we go in. And if somebody really wants to go ahead and invest despite the high risk he or she feels there is, then he may want a higher rate of return to compensate for the risk he's taking. Or sometimes if it's a mining project, he may choose to high grade the operation, mine quickly, walk away before things get bad, etc. Or finally, he could actually walk away completely from the project and go invest somewhere else. So all of these, once again, become important considerations that we need to look at. Still talking about our neighborhood, we position in what one of my friends calls the God's most blessed real estate on the planet, Africa, okay? But the perception, especially from the Western world, is that, you know, it's a continent of trouble, chaos, poverty, disease, famine, wars, you know, that's the perception. And sadly, we all get broad-brushed. Just as my $1 million house will be valued at $500,000 because of where it is. Irrespective of the 54 or so countries on our continent, we all get broad-brushed into this. And it's important that we start telling our own story, because if we leave that to the Western world, it's, you know, usually they don't tell it the way we should. I think there are some real good success stories about Africa, which we need to put out there. So it's important that the reality and the individual success stories that we have, stable economies, stable political situations, solid institutions in some of our countries. We need to be able to put that out there so that we don't get broad-brushed into this sometimes perception of Africa is a hopeless situation. I've met people who, and I don't want to mention names, but there are companies, especially in North America, who will tell you, no, we don't want to do anything in Africa because of the perception of risk. Irrespective of the fact that Africa is not one country, but it is over 50 countries with very different, stability and economic situations. So what is the African story? And I think this is what we really need to be putting out there. That fundamentally, as we speak, I think we have 1.3 billion or so in population, accounting for about 15% or so of the global population. 20% of the world's gold rests here. 60% of the world's cobalt sits on our continent, particularly in the DRC. And I think for those of you familiar with the electric vehicle drive, etc., battery elements, cobalt is one of the key minerals we need, and 60% of it sits here. And even if you stretch, we are talking about mining, but even in the agricultural space, 60% of the global arable land sits here. And what many of us don't realize is that Africa as a continent is bigger than China, the US, Western Europe, India, Argentina, and the British Isles put together from a land size. You can cut like we've done, and paste all of these there. So our continent is really one of great opportunity, but we must start believing it ourselves. We must start walking around boldly and chest out, and stepping out there confidently to tell our story. No one will do it for us. And this underscores some of the points I just made. Having said that, the bulk of the population is sitting here. It's a young and growing population. I think if you look at the median age of Africa, I think it's about 19 or 20 years. What that means is 50% of Africa's population is under 20 years. It does have some challenges, but it also has huge opportunities. The Chinas of this world are able to remain strong because there's a huge internal population that says if we can get it to work, the potential for our continent is enormous. And on the structural side, the political situation is not all chaotic as we are made to believe, but we are seeing improved governance, etc. So when we look at our continent, what is it from an investor's perspective? I'm sure many of you know the Fraser Institute. It's a Canadian institute that looks globally and assesses the investment friendliness, especially from an exploration perspective of the global mining industry. And if you look at the latest ranking for 2017, Ghana actually occupies the first position in Africa, from an investment attractiveness perspective. And it's something we shouldn't take for granted. Mali follows, and you have the likes of Botswana in the third position. And the investment attractiveness combines two issues. They look at what they call the policy perception. What are the policy situations in the country, etc. And then they look at the mineral potential, which is the actual resource in the ground. So they look at the resource endowment and they look at the policy perception, which is the framework that governs the sector. So if you look at the policy perception, Ghana sits at about the 5th position. And countries like Mali beat us because they've looked at what we did and then they made their policy framework a lot more friendlier. So that is why Mali would beat us, even though ultimately Ghana still remains very strong, given the long history of mining, the solid institutions that we've got, MINCOM, all of these things. And then if you get to the mineral potential, you notice that a country like the DRC suddenly takes the first position because it's a country that is super endowed with all kinds of minerals. So the point we are making is, if you look at it globally, oil and gas, everything, mining, all that, 30% of the world's resources sit in our continent. And that must count for something. This is another presentation of the similar Fraser thing with Ghana, Mali, Botswana. Ghana is even ahead of South Africa currently, as per that survey. I think many of us are aware that the South African mines are getting extremely deep now, more expensive. People are walking away. There's this whole land expropriation conversation that is beginning to give jitters to the investment community of the world. So I'm repeating all of this because we are actually in a great place as a country. We are actually in a very, very great place as a country, and we need to be able to capture that and move forward with it so that we can maximize the benefits. But I said at the beginning that investment is a risk and rewards conversation. So if you look at African countries, Control Risk did this, it's about a year old, where they looked at most of the key mining countries on the continent, looked at things like political stability, rule of law, security environment, because we are seeing Boko Harams in some countries, we are seeing all kinds of challenges elsewhere, international relations, how the country engages with a broader global community. And then on the economic side, the business environment, is it friendly, exchange rate issues, cost of doing business, and is it easy to do business or is more expensive? So they looked at all that. And Ghana is placed somewhere in the middle. I hope you can see where Ghana is. But the key point is you have countries, you have outliers, like I think it's Ethiopia also at the top. Zimbabwe is sitting way at the bottom because at the time this was done, the change hadn't happened. But Zimbabwe had a lot of mineral endowment, so I'm sure if we did this exercise again, Zimbabwe might move up a bit, But the message of that slide is that we are not the only ones in the market looking for investment. Countries are competing. It's a beauty contest. So you really must put your best foot forward. You must look good to be able to allow the investments to come in so you can exploit the mineral for your benefit. So why should anybody put $1 into Ghana? We think we can do that because, like we've said, in the political space, I think we have one of the most outstanding records on the continent. It stands out. In fact, I can tell you that because of the Brexit thing that has been going on, somebody did some work recently and even assigned higher political risk to the UK than to Ghana. I'm serious. Because there is so much uncertainty. All the big global companies sitting in the UK are now not too sure. Do we stay? Do we move? The banking sector or the manufacturing, I'm sure you heard the likes of Airbus, they have major facilities in the UK, and they are debating, do we move out or do we stay? Car manufacturing firms like Nissan and a few others there, Tata with their investments there. So the point is Ghana is not doing badly. There's so much turmoil out there that we should be able to leverage that for our benefit. Our economy not doing too badly, young, skilled, educated population, great location, and a growing economy with significant opportunities. So all of that must count for something. We shouldn't just leave it. And if we don't tell our story, no one is going to tell it for us. So what's the value proposition we put there? Over a century of mining in our country, okay? And mining as a sector has been the leading forex earner for our country. I think as a nation, we have not given mining its due. We take the money and we spend it. It goes into our consolidated fund and all of that. But the reality is that you can go back a couple of decades, and it's just been the mining industry that has been giving us the highest amount of forex. Somebody said if you took away the mining industry, I think our currency will drop by another 6 or 10%, something in that ballpark, or even more, So I think our industry is really critical to the economy of our nation. We have a really strong regulatory framework, strong sector. It's been in the business of managing the sector for a very long time. Other, countries have come to learn from them and are applying these things, in their jurisdictions. I mean, I have before me some of the finest mining professionals you can find anywhere. So when it comes to, we are exporting Ghanaian mining experts, and that's also got to count for something. Strong mineral endowment, and all of that. So there's so much that we have as a country. But what are the emerging issues? We've seen a wave of resource nationalism across our continent. And resource nationalism is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a double-edged sword. It cuts two ways. One, countries, rightly or wrongly, have not benefited enough from their investments. But sometimes it begs the question, whose fault is it really? Why are we in that space? And that's a conversation we need to have. But sometimes do we see a sudden swing? So you see Tanzania changing the mining code suddenly, Zambia changing the mining code suddenly, and all of that, all in the same name, revising the mining codes. And I think those are conversations that anybody who wants to invest in an economy would look at. Even in our own country, exploration, I believe that our country is seriously unexplored. That's my personal view. We are finding gold in all kinds of places. And if we could launch a major campaign and open it up, I'm sure it would be amazing how many commercial deposits, bankable projects we could actually end up with. Access to tenements and permitting could be a bit unclear sometimes and challenging. Small-scale mining, illegal mining, huge issue. We were all here when Obuasi was overrun a few years ago, and that didn't send a good signal to the investment community. So begs the issue, security of mining assets. I think for most mines in this country, we've had military contingents helping secure the assets. But I'm told now that government is intending to pull out the military. I think that's a concern that raises uncertainty for the investment community. And then how do we deal with a broader socioeconomic issue, infrastructure and development needs? And sometimes corruption is still, there are perceptions of it. I can assure you Ghana is still way better than some of our other countries, but there are still issues we will need to resolve around corruption. So before anybody puts his dollar in the country, the question he or she would ask himself is it getting less or more risky to invest in our country, and specifically our mining sector? And is it getting more or less uncertain to do business in our country? If it is, it undermines the investment decision. So what can we do about some of these things? I think we need a predictable business environment with clear rules and policies. Most of that we've got already. But the issue is going forward, can we be sure about what will come? Or is it going to be so turbulent we don't know what's going to happen? And we should also avoid ad hoc and non-collaborative. Somebody used collaboration earlier on in one of the presentations. I think even if government wants to make changes, collaboration must be the name of the game. Have the conversations rather than just impose it, which worsens the uncertainty. And the whole trust conversation between government and the industry, I think let's put the matters on the table, address them, and move forward. It's important. Other than that, we undermine. And then the final 2 points really incentivize the exploration sector. I think if we did that, it would really open up our country some more. And finally, promote Ghana actively. It's our job. No one is going to do it for us. We need to actively take our country out there, promote it as outstanding. Even though it's a house in Hatchery, it's equally good as the one in Peter's area. Thank you very much.
I think that was a great one. We know, and you re-emphasize that Ghana is a fantastic place. And we know. But the question I have is it a matter of we don't have people that will let government know that we can have Ghana own mine, or we are learning from the past, where we used to have the state gold mines and we mismanaged them. Why I'm saying this is we were here in this country and certain investors came in to mine at Tebrebe. And you and I know that this was pension funds that came into that investment. The project period was 10 years. And right after the 10th year, they vacated with their profits and everything. And they sold the mine and made more profit. What are we doing? Is it because we don't have people that can put together fantastic business plans that, you know, can attract our own pension funds, which currently we are investing them in ventures that are not giving us anything. We are actually losing monies. We are going into ventures that we are losing monies. So maybe we have to pick this up and see where we can take it to.
Absolutely, yeah.
The next question.
I think that what I would say is that that was an excellent presentation, and the timing of it compared to what Peter Mponsa just said, I'm seeing as gradually forming a team that could drive this whole agenda of, you know, marketing this issue.
Absolutely.
Again, when you talk about the issue of if we have issues, let's solve it and move on. And you cited the example of what the minister said. Yes, that's right. I think we've been here earlier in the morning also. There was the issue of, not in the morning, earlier days, there was the issue of a stability agreement or stabilization agreement or whatever you call it. I think all these issues, if we're talking about creating the enabling environment, there is definitely going to be something you have to trade off.
Absolutely.
We cannot eat our cake and have it. So if we know we are in competition with others, we want our place to be attractive. Yes, of course, you will have to do something to get something. And if you want to bring everything out, it will not work. So maybe you two have got a point somewhere. The two presentations fit very well. Look at the others.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important. The whole issue of Ghanaian ownership, you know, has to come to the fore. I believe the challenge has obviously been more in the area of funding, accessing the capital. I think some of the ideas Dr. Mponsa is tabling now, and some of the opportunities we have may well help deal with that. But we could also look at a regulatory framework which could be skewed a bit to make it easier, you know, for some local actual participation from an ownership perspective. And then we develop a roadmap and see how we can work towards increasing the equity participation over time, investing in the right things, you know, going for the right projects, so that at the end of the day, the money sits in Ghana and benefits, you know, our broader nation. Thank you very much.
I will just summarize what you just said.